powered by the Montana Television Network. This is the 10 o'clock news on Q2, Montana's news leader.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jeanelle Slade.
And I'm Jay Cohn. Members of the Belfry community packed into the Carbon County courtroom today as a man convicted of gunning down his wife and two others faced his sentence.
The three victims were shot a combined 17 times in their Belfry home last year. A motive has never been revealed. Today, prosecutors told the court that no reason would ever bring peace to the family of the victims. At the end of the hearing, Judge Blair Jones sentenced Robert Jim LeCoux to 300 years at the Montana State Prison. 100 years for each of his victims. This past June, LeCoux was convicted on 3 counts of deliberate homicide. Prosecutors said Karen LeCoux, her sister Sharon Lamb, and brother-in-law Lloyd Lamb never saw the violence coming. The day after the murders, LeCoux was arrested in Spokane. He claims he left Belfry before the murders, but after a week-long trial this summer, the jury found LeCoux guilty. Q2's Samantha Harrelson was in the courtroom today and joins us now with more. Sammy?
Jay, it was an emotional afternoon in court as family members spoke about the loved ones lost in a crime Judge Blair Jones calls one of the worst he has ever seen. Family members of the victims, LeCoux's wife Karen Hill LeCoux, her sister Sharon Lamb, and brother Lloyd Lamb, spoke about who they were and the unbearable impact their losses had on their families. Brothers, sisters, and children of the victims asked LeCoux, "How could you harm such good and innocent people?" In the end, Judge Jones says that factor was key in imposing the harshest sentence he was allowed, saying the 3 victims were totally defenseless, especially Lloyd Lamb, a disabled veteran who was shot in bed.
For the court, that is just unbelievable conduct. Unbelievably violent, unbelievably vile, unbelievably horrifying. And I join you in wondering how it can happen.
The defense said today LeCoux maintains his innocence despite the conviction. LeCoux did not speak today. Jay?
All right, thanks, Sammy.
LeCoux was also implicated in the beating death of a homeless man in Texas and a shootout with police in Tennessee some 2 decades ago. That information, though, was not admissible at trial. In Glendive, a 44-year-old man arrested today on suspicion of killing his father this past Monday. Dawson County Deputy Attorney Brett Irigoyen says Dawson County deputies arrested Todd Fisher this afternoon. This following a joint investigation with the Department of Justice into the death of Wilbur Fisher. On Monday, Fisher's son told authorities he discovered his father dead in his home. Wilbur Fisher died of a single gunshot wound to the head. Irigoyen says the investigation is ongoing and the affidavit in the case is sealed. Tonight, Todd Fisher is being held at the Dawson County Jail in Glendive. Republican senators showed unity last night as they passed a budget that paves the way toward tax reform. Seth Lemon has more details from Capitol Hill.
The yeas are 51, the nays are 49.
The Senate cast a mostly party-line vote to approve a $4 trillion budget plan Thursday night. President Trump praised the vote on Twitter. This now allows for the passage of large-scale tax cuts and reform, which will be the biggest in the history of our country.
It sets the stage for us to pass major tax cuts that will deliver more jobs and higher wages for hardworking Americans all over the country.
This budget makes room for a tax reform plan that would add about $1.5 trillion to the federal deficit over 10 years. And it allows Senate Republicans to pass tax reform without a Democratic filibuster, meaning they need just 51 votes instead of the usual 60. Democrats say the GOP tax proposal benefits the wealthiest Americans the most.
Essentially, it green lights tax breaks for the super wealthy in this country at the expense of everybody else.
House Speaker Paul Ryan told CBS this morning that they will introduce a new tax bracket designed to keep the tax cuts from benefiting the top 1%.
Once we get that budget resolution, that tells us how our numbers will work. Then we'll introduce the bill, which will have that 4th bracket designed to make sure we don't have a big drop in income tax rates for high-income people.
Ryan says his goal is to get a tax reform bill out of the House in early November.
Mr. Alexander.
Giving the Senate several weeks to consider and pass it before the end of the year. Seth Lemon, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Before Congress can start working on tax reform, the House must vote on the Senate version of the budget. That could happen as early as next week. Montana's 2 U.S. senators on opposite sides of that vote last night. Senior Senator John Tester opposed the resolution he says
it cuts crucial health care programs while including tax cuts that mostly benefit the wealthy. But Senator Steve Daines believes that working-class Americans will be the ones who will benefit the most.
We've got to set aside the minor differences, step back and look at the big picture here of what this means right now for the American worker, for American jobs, for global competitiveness. It's time to give the American worker a pay increase. We can do that by delivering a tax cut.
The tax reform bill, hopefully we can get that done before the first year, but like I said, it's got a long way to go before it hits prime time. But I hope it does get done. I think we need tax reform in this country, but it's got to be tax reform that's well thought out and really delivers for the American people.
Republican leaders say that tax reform bill could be ready for debate by early November.
The state of Montana has collected about $380,000 in the first 3 months of a new medical marijuana tax.
Providers had until this Monday to report sales for the quarter, those sales subject to a 4% tax. The Department of Revenue says some 400 providers reported a total of $9.5 million in revenues. The average tax payment was just under $1,000, but one provider paid $30,000.
The tax is part of the new medical marijuana bill passed by state lawmakers earlier this year. The money goes to set up a marijuana tracking system and other new regulatory programs for the industry.
On to the weather scene. Q2's Bob McGuire here with us now. More on the big wind that blew through our region tonight, Bob.
Dude, I was out in that when it happened, and it was amazing how this thing was blowing through the region. Let me show you some of the peak wind gusts we had as that cold front. That's what it was, a cold front that blew through the area tonight. We go to 17 miles south of Fort Smith. They had a 72-mile-per-hour wind gust. 12 miles southeast of Immigrant, look at that, 67-mile-per-hour winds. 10 miles east of Molt, 63 mile per hour. Meanwhile, over at Columbus, 6 miles east of there, 59 mile per hour wind. Billings Airport reported 58 miles per hour, and even Laurel had a 55 mile per hour wind. And guess what? The winds are dying down tonight, but tomorrow we have new high pressure cell moving into the region, and we have something we call a pressure gradient will move in, and that's going to kick up the winds again on Saturday. So sometime during the afternoon, the winds will start kicking up again, but not quite as bad as what we had today. Jay, Jeanelle?
All right, thanks, Bob. Nearly 250,000 people will learn they have breast cancer this year. That could be your mother, sister, daughter, your wife, or even you. And that's why thousands turned out in pink tonight for the Nile Rodeo. Tough Enough to Wear Pink Night celebrates survivors and honors those who've lost the fight. As survivors walked into the arena tonight, you could feel the power and emotion of their special bond.
It's powerful, it's moving. To be there with my fellow survivors, it is just oh, it's so important, and I just love it. We need that support, the prayers and the love to shower upon us.
To be here tonight together is a pretty big and special deal for them. Being at an event like this and getting out there and telling those women that this is something you really need to do, and making them aware of it's, you know, if you find it early, it's treatable.
Now, $1 from every ticket sold goes toward the St. Vincent Healthcare EVA project, a program that provides uninsured or underinsured women with free mammograms.
A sad note to tell you about for all of us here at Q2 and our thousands of viewers tonight.
Our colleague and friend Craig Wilson passed away unexpectedly this week at the age of 69. Craig was a familiar face here on Q2, helping us cover the state political scene for as long as we can remember. Now, he offered his political insight for nearly 3 decades. This footage takes us back to 1992.
And this is from 2002 here. Just 3 years ago, Professor Wilson retired after 33 years with the MSUB Political Science Department, and perhaps he'll be best remembered for the MSUB poll. He directed the poll at the college for 26 years. Craig Wilson, survived by his wife Christiane and 2 sons. Tonight, our thoughts are with his family.
You're watching MTN News with Jay Cohn and Jeanelle Slade. Storm Tracker weather with Bob McGuire. And sports with Scott Green.